Names have intentionally been changed or redacted because they're irrelevant. This is about me advocating for myself and my children, not against anything. If our friendship and connection gives you any information or knowledge about the names that I have redacted or changed, please keep it to yourself. It's not what we're doing. They're irrelevant. We have closing argument. What has been done to my children and I for almost 2 years is criminal. In May of 2019, Satan filed an ex parte request to change custody with only cherry-picked and misrepresented evidence based on a made-up accusation of parental alienation because of his belief that this court considers him a goose that lays golden eggs. Since my first responsive declaration that I filed at the time, I have been pleading with this court for help and protection from Satan's ongoing abuse and coercive control. The response to my pleas was to call me crazy and tell me that Satan was a wonderful man during the December 2019 hearings, and to temporarily change custody of our children pending an evidentiary hearing, resulting in what has been identified by the court's own expert, Dr. Name Redacted, as my having a plea for help mental profile. I have been trying to get away from Satan for 8 years. I am not obsessed with Satan. I am not a willing participant of any toxic attraction. I am not interested in knowing Satan or having anything to do with him. And everything that I have done has been with the guidance of our therapists and in the best interest of our children without reference to Satan's needs. At the time that Satan blindsided me with these accusations and his ex parte filings in 2019, Satan and I had completely separate and independent lives and households. The children had a secure routine, safety, a voice, and a team of professionals to advocate for their interests. They had a long-term relationship with their therapists and doctors, and Satan and I had an established parent coordinator and our own individual therapists, all of whom communicated freely to make sure that we were doing our best and always acting in the best interests of our children. It was common knowledge that Satan has what he refers to as a sexual addiction and obsession to me, and that it was unwelcome and uninvited by me. Satan has testified during these proceedings about his addiction. It was discussed in detail in Dr. Name Redacted's report. The court has acknowledged it as recently as October 6th during the hearings on that day, stating that I believe that he has identified he had a sexual obsession with you. I don't think there is any dispute about that. And Satan's own independently hired expert that Satan has been forthcoming about his obsession and addiction. The ongoing topic of dealing with Satan's sexual obsession was being addressed by our parent coordinator at the time of Satan's ex parte filings in May of 2019. And his sudden request to change custody was a calculated attack seeking revenge for my rejection of his constant sexual abuse and harassment. He maintained a long-standing threat that he would go nuclear in court and take the kids if I rejected him, which is exactly what he has done. Satan and my children are not a package deal, and I do not have any legal obligation to tend to his sexual obsession as the goose that lays golden eggs to earn the right to be a mother to my children. At the start of Satan's 2018 summer vacation with the children, I unblocked Satan for the first time in several months to temporarily allow text communication, since the children were traveling with Satan and would not have access to text communications with me. It was a vacation that Satan wanted me to attend with him, which I refused. Satan then used that opportunity to spend the entire 2 weeks of his international Disney cruise and Disney World vacation texting me sexually abusive and harassing messages, begging for me to send him naked pictures, promising to go to therapy, and alternating between offering me money and gifts in exchange for naked pictures, or threatening me not to reject him or I will regret it. 200 pages of text messages that this court has read. That was by no means the first instance of Satan's behavior, but it was certainly an escalation of it. And at the time, those text messages were provided to both of our therapists as part of my ongoing, constant effort to establish, maintain, and enforce boundaries with Satan while doing my best to keep my children out of a prolonged custody battle in light of his years-long threats. By February 2019, Satan was sending me videos of himself masturbating and calling me over FaceTime while masturbating. These situations were also sent to our therapists at the time. In April of 2019, Satan texted me during my spring break parenting time, commenting that he wishes that I would have invited him to join us so he could be with his family. Again, these comments were unwelcome, uninvited, and sent to our therapists in the hope that they could continue to communicate the boundaries to Satan and also to prevent his threatened court escalations. Both Dr. Redacted and Dr. Redacted mentioned Satan's boundary violations, which were noted in Dr. Redacted's report. By the beginning of May 2019, Satan had fired all of the children's advocates, as well as our parent coordinator, and he began his threatened custody battle with vengeance, using the children as weapons to gain control of me or punish me for rejecting him. A temporary change of custody was ordered on June 20th, 2019, and immediately following that hearing, Satan sat in the hallway of the court and cried. His attorney telling me that this is not what he wanted. He just wanted me to do what he told me to, and that he loved me, all of which remains extremely bizarre and abuse on its own merit. Because of the long-standing involved role that our therapist and parent coordinator have had, I was well advised that if Satan were ever to follow through with his threats, that my best course of action would be to seek a full 730 psychological evaluation and make sure that the children had an attorney, which were the requests that I made of the court at the time. I was ordered to pay the full cost of the 730 evaluation, and Dr. Name Redacted testified that it was the most comprehensive and expensive evaluation that she has ever prepared. Despite that, from the very beginning of these proceedings, which started 8 months ago in earnest, in July of 2020, Part 2. Despite that, from the very beginning of these proceedings, which started 8 months ago in earnest in July of 2020, Satan was tactically prepared to object to Dr. Name Redacted's report based on it being hearsay. Dr. Name Redacted conducted a comprehensive evaluation and prepared a 70-page report. She met with both Satan and I numerous times and our children and spoke with dozens of others, including the children's teachers, therapists, medicating physician, our parent coordinator, and our personal reference. And still, Satan objected to her report as hearsay, only eventually stipulating to enter doctor's report when he became concerned he would be responsible for repayment of the fees that I paid, totaling over $30,000. In direct contradiction to the hearsay objection to Dr. Name Redacted's report, Satan hired his own independent expert to testify extensively in an attempt to discredit Dr. Name Redacted and offer his own recommendations that Satan had approved of and paid for. Despite having never met Satan, me, or the children, and based only on Satan's narrative, the ethical violations of what he has attempted to testify to are extreme and a contradiction of his own professional direction of needing the entire clinical picture in order to understand the dynamics of any situation. These ethical violations are of the same nature of those committed by our prior evaluator, Dr. Previous Name Redacted, which I also addressed at the time and resulted in his refusal to write a report for the court and is the basis of my request for release of his records. Neither doctor nor doctor identified any instance or suggestion of the prerequisite to any parental alienation claim that the children resisted or rejected visitation. The entire basis of Satan's ex parte request for a change in custody in June of 2019 was based on his accusation of parental alienation, and it has been shown repeatedly, both during doctor and doctor's testimony, that there is no legal application of parental alienation, as evidenced by the absence of our children resisting or refusing Satan's shared parenting time. Therefore, there should have been no change of custody at the time, and certainly no issuance or reissuance of any of the numerous versions of restraining orders that have been weaponized against me. Not only was a change of custody not warranted, even on the temporary basis that it was ordered, but the entire accusation and request for it was a calculated abusive attack, and I am again pleading with this court to protect my children and I from his further attacks. The best predictor of future behavior is a person's past behavior, and Satan has made it clear he will not stop his vengeful attacks. Satan is and has always been extremely abusive, which he made clear during his own testimony. Satan's sexual obsession and addiction is abuse. His constant efforts to control me is abuse. Hiding cameras in my home is abuse. Hiding cameras in our marital home is abuse. Sending me videos of him masturbating is abuse. Sending me videos of myself naked is abuse. Hiring a private investigator to follow me is abuse. Turning off my access to community property credit cards while married at his whim is abuse. Paying someone to monitor my internet and social media usage is abuse. Interfering with my efforts to have a relationship with my children is abuse. Filing false police reports is abuse. Threatening to go nuclear in court is abuse. Calculating a financial attack to drive me to bankruptcy is abuse. Filing dozens of ex parte requests based on false allegations and bogus mental health concerns is abuse. Coercive control is abuse. Isolating my children from their friends and family is abuse. Attempting to isolate me from my support system is abuse. Satan's perception of being the goose that lays golden eggs and initiating a premeditated custody battle to use our children as weapons for power and control is abuse. Satan is trying simply to litigate his opinion that I have no value to my children if I am not meeting his sexual needs. The web of lies that Satan continues to spin is chaotic and absurd. He contradicts himself constantly, and it is impossible to even try to keep his lies straight. He changes his narrative at whim. He cherry picks through facts and alters or misrepresents evidence to suit his purposes. At this point, we finally have a comprehensive enough court record that his lies and contradictions speak for themselves. He has shown his pathology and his calculation, his cycles and his patterns. It is all well documented as part of the court record, as well in Dr. Name Redacted's report, without all of the legal theatrics required of Satan's legal team objecting to everything that I say and aggressively maneuvering to prevent me from entering any evidence. For example, look for part 3. Part 3. For example, Satan made reference to my 2015 vocational evaluation, which was already entered as court record. That vocational evaluation references my former career as a paralegal. Satan is well aware of my former career because he hired me when I was 21 years old. While I acknowledge that I am not an experienced attorney, I do have some limited, if dated, experience and knowledge of the law and legal process. Despite that, while being forced to represent myself throughout this entire trial, Satan has repeatedly accused me of being coached and asked numerous times for this court to instruct me to show him the contents of my notes, and he has even gone so far as to try to identify one of my long-term friends, Viva, as being an attorney that is coaching me during this testimony. On its own, this kind of spin and false narrative is very typical of Satan, and I usually just ignore him. However, it is deeply concerning that this court has been so willing to accept Satan's claim that Viva is an attorney at its face value without any evidence that the court's own minute order from July 20th, 2020 assigned her a California state bar number. Viva is not an attorney, and she doesn't even live in California. I have known her for 16 years. She has been a guest in our home while we were married, and Satan knows her as well. Viva is a nurse in another state, and she was interviewed by Dr. Name Redacted as part of the 7:30 psychological evaluation. So all of this information is court record. Yet for reasons that I can't imagine, simply because Satan said she was an attorney, this court took that as absolute truth and independently researched the state bar number of a similar name, and it assigned it to her in the minute order. Another example of Satan's ever-changing narrative is the fact that he testified that the Cadillac that I currently drive was a birthday gift that he purchased for me and presented to me with a huge bow. Yet during our divorce proceedings, he testified that the car was not a gift. It was a joint family purchase that was not intended to be perceived as a gift, which resulted in this court ordering me to pay for the full finance cost of the car, which was by all accounts a birthday gift. That was given to me, lied about on court record, and that I had to fully pay the $90,000 that it cost. Another example of Satan's ever-evolving narrative is the fact that he does not have a PhD of any kind at all. He does not have a PhD in anything. He most certainly doesn't have a PhD in understanding Amber, which was what he attempted to testify to. Satan does not know me better than any other human being that has ever lived, even my mother, as he also attempted to testify to. Satan testified that he hasn't spoken to me face-to-face in over 2 years, nor had any text contact in at least as long. He further testified that he hasn't even checked my social media in years, and the only access to or knowledge of my social media was what was reported to him by whomever that he pays to monitor it. It is only from that independently employed social media monitor that he has received the tens of thousands of pages of my social media and Facebook account that he filed as his evidence. He spent the first 5 years of these court proceedings filing his pleadings with my name as Amber P., former married last name. He only corrected it when I finally mentioned it to him after ignoring it for years. My middle name is Louise. Satan does not vaguely know me at all. I don't know if he ever genuinely did, but I can tell you with certainty that he does not know me now. Satan testified that I am incapable of empathy because when his dad died in 2018 or 2017, I was insensitive and did not respond to his needs appropriately. When I pointed out that Satan's father did not die in 2018 or 2017, he died in 2015, Satan's response was that he had simply mixed up the year, but he does remember now that it was 2015 because I cheated on him when he went to his father's funeral. Satan and I were not together in 2015 or 2017 or 2018. His narrative and desperate need to be a victim doesn't even make sense, and he literally makes up his narrative to suit his agenda as he goes along, creating constant, irrelevant chaos and creating great trauma and harm to our children in the process. Satan has stated in his various declarations and his testimony that we did not attend therapy together, and further, that he believed that my efforts to follow the guidance of our therapist and maintain no contact between them was simply a game that I play. Then he introduces his own therapist, Dr. Name, as a witness, and she proceeds to testify that Satan and I did attend joint therapy with her and my therapist, Dr. Name Redacted, and that it was their constant advice that we maintain no contact with each other during periods of activation to avoid conflict. It was based on that guidance that a group text message was created amongst Satan and I and our children to communicate exclusively about the children while still allowing me to establish and enforce clear boundaries with Satan and not to force me to be exposed to his sexual addiction and obsession. all while staying focused and clear as to doing what the children need from us, no matter what it takes from us. Watch out for part 4.
I know everybody can't stand white folk, but
Satan's own perjury and narrative contradicts itself so often that it's impossible to keep straight. He has no credibility or integrity. Everything out of his mouth is a lie and should be acknowledged as such by this court. A fact that was made clear recently and yet again when Satan's own attorney told this court that she doesn't even know how to argue in support of Satan's latest ex parte RFO filed in December 2020 if I don't provide a written response to her in advance, which she claims were the rules that I simply refused to follow. And further, demanding that the court issue a default ruling as to Satan's latest version of the reissued restraining orders, as well as his request to terminate my parental rights, that I be incarcerated, and involuntarily committed to a mental health institution under Satan's direct supervision and based exclusively on Dr. Paid Expert's newest mental health diagnosis. All of this chaos, despite my instruction from the Family Law Facilitator's Office that a demand for a written response was not a rule to punish with a default ruling, and that his requests were preposterous and not even within the court's power to do. Satan and his attorney and the children's former attorney, name redacted, who is now part of Satan's extensive legal team, should be expected to be well aware of this and the fact that they are seeking the court's order anyway, or at least making the effort to convolute the record even further, is undeniably calculated and intentional. The record speaks for itself. Satan invents court orders that he claims I violate. For immediate example, there was no court order signed in January of 2020. Satan attempted to testify repeatedly that there was, and that I was in violation of it. The transcript of that court hearing is court record, and there was no court order signed, and I certainly didn't violate a court order that doesn't exist, no matter how aggressively and repetitively Satan states otherwise. The record literally speaks for itself again. Also, the stipulation that I signed in June 2017 to minimize the conflict at that time and entered as Exhibit 503, which made reference to prohibited publications and which is the basis of Satan's accusations regarding my social media, and also the issuance and reissuance of numerous versions of restraining orders, does not say what Satan attempts to portray. The stipulation was a heavily negotiated agreement and based specifically on this court's clear and concise instruction at the March 24th, 2015 hearing, a transcript of which was admitted as Exhibit 591, specifically identifying the limits of my social media as not posting his name, his social security number, his driver's license, his income, and medical information. Then again on July 24th, during this trial, the court again clarified, stating that Satan's demands were an issue of the court's limitations and that this court was very specific about what I could not post, no matter how aggressively and repetitively that Satan demands otherwise. During Satan's own testimony, he made it clear that the intention of the stipulation was to not restrict or interfere with my First Amendment rights or my domestic abuse advocacy in any way. He then further testified that I tricked and manipulated him into signing that stipulation. Satan is an accomplished contract attorney and a partner at a top-tier law firm. I did not trick or manipulate him into anything. He is just trying once again to rewrite history to suit his latest narrative. Satan is an attorney. Satan is represented by his former law school classmate, and between them they have almost 50 years of legal experience. In addition, Satan has co-opted our children's former attorney, name redacted, who now works for Satan's attorney and is a part of his extensive legal team. Satan is the only one during this entire trial that has had legal representation. My children have not had any unbiased representation and have been repeatedly ignored and disregarded during these custody proceedings. My children have never once been spoken to or consulted during this entire trial, and Satan has been the only source of information about them. Satan has not only isolated the children from me, but he has fully isolated them from their entire extended family, only allowing any contact with any of their family and friends when monitored and controlled by Satan. He has made it clear that his apparent truth and perspective cannot be trusted. His narrative, depending on how it suits him, has gone from claiming that I am being coached during my forced self-representation, then claiming that my legal sophistication is so advanced that I am able to trick and manipulate him into signing a contract that he didn't understand, circling all the way back around to attempting to diagnose me with a variety of mental illness while asking the court to punish me as he sees necessary. By Satan's own testimony, he admits that we have had no contact with each other for almost 2 years, and during that time, without reference to or influenced by me, he has cycled from telling this court that he loves me, that he just wants to be in control of me having a healthy relationship with the children, to him claiming that I suffer from borderline personality disorder and asking the court to order that my brain be scanned and monitored by Satan while I attend a blank center therapy program that he selected, progressing to his deciding that the blank center was not an adequate enough program for me, and then changing his mental health diagnosis of me to schizophrenia and asking the court to force me to be treated at an inpatient mental health facility under his supervision and control. All of this while admitting he hasn't even spoken to me in years and still believing that he is in a position to diagnose me with no reference to or evidence of any of the behaviors or actions which might support his supposed diagnosis. Watch out for part 5. Part 5, which will go to the end now. If I am believed to be so mentally incompetent, why am I not entitled to legal fees so that I have legal representation to advocate for me? Why do my children not have the right to have the playing field level so that their right to a relationship with both parents is protected? Why are my children not entitled to the right to have an attorney? I do not suffer from any of the various mental illness that Satan has tried to diagnose me with, or that he has paid an expert that has never met me to suggest that I might be diagnosed with. I do not suffer from borderline personality disorder. I am not delusional, and I do not suffer from schizophrenia. I have ADHD and complex post-traumatic stress disorder following childhood trauma and an extremely abusive marriage to Satan. Nothing more. I am not unaware of this. I have been on my own therapy and healing path for many years without reference or connection to Satan and with no desire to reestablish one. Satan's agenda and interference with my healing and therapy in his efforts to continue to avoid accountability, even to himself, and try to regain control and force me to reconcile with him are painfully obvious and abuse. I am not obsessed with Satan. I am not a willing participant of the toxic interactions with Satan. I am repulsed by Satan's sexual addictions, and likewise accept that Satan finds my social media presence repulsive. I do not know Satan. I have no interest in knowing Satan. We are no longer married, and I have no interest in changing that. I am an exceptional mother. I love my children unconditionally, and I have done and will continue to do whatever I am ordered by this court to do as I continue to fight for my right to be a mother to my children without reference to, interference, control, or monitoring by Satan. I'm asking this court to put an end to this ongoing abuse and coercive control, and to return my children to the safety and security of my home, and to finally protect us from Satan. The only thing that I want to add in addition to my closing argument of yesterday is that when I identified the progression of Satan's latest cycle of loving me to diagnosing me with borderline personality disorder, and then diagnosing me with schizophrenia, and acknowledging my ongoing concern that he will never stop his attacks I had written that before Ms. former law school classmate presented her closing arguments, when she suddenly created a new analogy of likening me to a pedophile repeatedly, then intentionally and bizarrely referring to sexual abuse and identifying it as the worst abuse that a person can suffer, while trying to create some narrative or perception of me being a sexual abuser, simply as an analogy. Then shifting to dismissing Satan's documented and admitted sexual abuse of me as irrelevant and a figment of my mentally ill imagination. I want to point out yet again that having to sit through hours and hours of being devalued and dehumanized by Satan, on behalf of Satan, and in the testimony and speeches written by Satan for these past months and years is extremely difficult and painful, especially without anyone to advocate on my behalf, and would have been impossible for anyone that suffered from any of the mental illness that Satan has repeatedly tried to diagnose me with. This needs to be done. I am confident that I have advocated for myself and my children and presented my perspective. I'm pleading yet again with this court to put an end to this court abuse and to protect my children and I, and bring my children home to their mother. My children need their mother without fear of Satan. Now I will sit through another couple of hours of listening to Miss former law school classmate finish insulting me and aggressively arguing my dehumanization and my absence of value if I am not meeting Satan's sexual needs, so that it can finally be done. Thank you, I submit.